This video is sponsored by Brush Galaxy. Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to break this painting down into steps that are easier to follow than you might imagine so that you can have a go and amaze yourself. Okay, as explained in the intro, I'm going to break this down into steps so that you learn not only the painting techniques, but also about the app that I'm using, Procreate. Having said that, I don't see any reason why you couldn't use a different app on a different tablet and still follow along. Within the app Procreate, however, I'm going to be using their default A4 canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. In terms of the color profile, within Procreate, I'm using the sRGB, and it's the code that ends in 2.1. And by default, it comes as one of the options within Procreate. In terms of the brushes, I'm going to be using within airbrushing, the soft brush, the medium brush, and maybe the medium hard brush. Within inking, I'm going to be using the studio pen. Within organic, I'm going to be using the rainforest brush, as well as an amended swordgrass brush. I'm going to amend a couple of the brushes as we go along, but don't worry, I will explain that as we get to that point. In terms of the colours, I have pre-selected a colour palette. And you can easily use the same colours by going to the value section within Procreate and typing in the codes for each colour one at a time. Press enter, the colour appears up here and you can tap it together yourself. Each of those codes is down in the video description, as well as a link that takes you to my Patreon page where you can download the whole file for free to save you some time. And there at Patreon is also the place that you can support this channel and gain access to extended tutorials and other exclusive content as well. I'd like to say a massive thank you to everyone who either currently supports me over at Patreon or has done in the past. It makes a huge difference to my ability to keep this channel going, and yeah, it's hugely appreciated. With all that said and done, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is turn this A4 canvas to its portrait orientation. Then I'm going to go to my colours, I'm going to go to the first colour on the top row and drag from the colour circle into the canvas, let go, and then it flood fills the entire canvas. I'm going to stay on the same layer, but I'm going to go back to my colours. I'm going to choose the second colour. I'm going to go to my brushes, airbrushing, soft brush. I'm going to put it up to quite a big size, about 40%, and 100% opacity, and straight through the centre. I'm just going to do a band of this colour. Then I'm going to go over here to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur that in pretty significantly, all the way across in fact, to 100% and deselect. Then I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 2. With my brushes, I'm going to go to the medium brush within airbrushing. I'm going to go to my colours, I'm going to choose the third colour on the top row. I'm going to put the brush size at around 5% and the opacity, well, pretty high at around 70%. And then I'm just going to try and judge it by eye across the centre. And I'm just going to do a series of shapes. You don't have to be consistent. I'm just creating a series of shapes that would very roughly and loosely represent trees in that distance. And they do not have to be exacting at all. I'm slightly bigger in some places, something like this. And then for the lower section, we just turn it up, I don't know, 15%, and just blot that in, just because we don't need any of the cream colour left at the end. Then I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm just going to blur that in to about the 7%. I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 3. I'm going to stay on the medium brush within airbrushing, but I'm going to move to the fourth colour on the top row. I'm going to put the brush size down to 2%, keep it at the 70%, and just now, below the halfway, I want to create a line that cuts across, and I can hold it until it snaps to a straight line. And then I just want to create a really nice horizontal line. Now, if you're not sure how to create a horizontal line and you think it might be just a little bit off, it's fine. Just keep holding it, tap on the screen, and it should automatically put it to that straight line, which is now completely horizontal. And also, if you're not quite happy with the placement of it, well, you can just go to the transform. And again, you can move it up and down to put it exactly where you want it to be. I'm going to move it just a tad closer to the top edge of those trees. I don't want it to be too far away, because those distant trees would then look too vast, too big. So I'm just going to put it around there perhaps. That line is only really there as a guide to help us judge where to put everything else. So don't worry too much about that. And then going to switch brush to the organic rainforest brush. Now I'm going to reset it and go back on the brush, And I'm going to change the spacing from the default 27 to about 35. Just, it creates a few more gaps between those textures, and I think it works a little better. Only subtly different. And again, with the fourth color on the top row, with the rainforest brush, I'm going to turn it down with the brush size at 2% and maybe the opacity, dial it back to about 60. And let's just zoom in a little bit so you can really see what we're doing. Now we want some more foreground trees compared to everything we've already created. So I'm just going to circle in some clumps of this foliage. And I definitely want it to cut in front of large sections of the more distant foliage. Now I don't need to worry too much because, again, big sections of these trees are going to be obscured by even nearer to trees too. We definitely need to get some of this texture in here to begin. So I'm just adding this in circles, bunches of tree foliage. Maybe we could turn that even down even more, lower on the 2%, maybe just some smaller ones here even. Now you've got to think about them in relation to the horizon line. So they're going to have tree trunks that grow down and then sort of connect roughly at this point, maybe a little bit further down from there, but certainly at least they're going to connect to there. Okay, I'm going to go to that layer, tap on it and put on the alpha lock, which means if we go backwards, maybe just back to the third color again, and we can add to this texture. It's only going to add within the confines of the shapes we've got on that layer already. So we will do that again, still with the rainforest brush. Perhaps we'll turn it down from the 60 to the 30, and we'll also turn it down from the 2 just to the top end of the 1% as well. Zoom in, and then we're just looking to add highlights into that texture, break it up a little bit. Certainly at the top part of our foliage and the trees, it's going to reflect back more of the ambient environmental light coming from the sky, whereas the underside is probably going to retain some more of the shadow. We'll move that all the way across. Again, just focus a little bit more at the very top. We could also perhaps try going back to the second color. So we're using default brushes in this tutorial, but if you'd like to bring your art to the next level, you could try premium brushes from Brush Galaxy. Brush Galaxy enables you to unlock over 50,000 premium Procreate brushes for a fraction of the price. You can access over 20 different categories of brushes like fur, lettering, nature, and animals, and many others. So for example, sometimes I struggle with things like grass textures, and a quick search here on Brush Galaxy, and you get access to page after page of really interesting, great grass stamps and grass textures for you to experiment with. Start now and get the first 7 days for free. Join thousands of other artists using Brush Galaxy tools to bring their art to the next level. The link is in the comments and in the description. So maybe we can just add to the top part of some of these. Imagine there's a shape here, for example. Just aim for the top part of it. So we're getting these kind of round forms. This is something that's intended to be quite quick because we're going to add more things that obscure it anyway. I do think that now looking at it, I mean, as much as you can choose the colors in advance, I feel that the saturation is not quite strong enough. So I'm going to go to the adjustments, hue, saturation and brightness. And by default, the saturation is at 50, but I'm going to turn it up to 55. I think it just sings. I think it just works a little bit better. Before we move forward, I'm just going to go on this layer with the eraser. Doesn't really matter what we set it on. I've got it on hard brush with an airbrushing, that's fine. 4% size, maybe 70% opacity, and I'm just going to fade that horizon line back somewhat. Maybe do 2 passes at that. So you can still see it, but it really is going to be almost invisible when we start adding things over the top, and that is going to work better. So I'll just zoom out to give you the context of the whole canvas, and you can see how everything is working together. Zoom in again, go to my layers, and create a new layer. I'm going to go to my brushes. I'm going to use the studio pen with an inking. I'm going to go to the colors, and I'm going to use the 5th color on the top row. I'm going to have the brush, maybe it's around 15% size, and around 50% opacity. And we've got to think in terms of that horizon line. So some of the trees are definitely going to start from that point. So we can press on more at the beginning and then release the pressure as we get further up. And then we kind of want these branches splintering off, maybe disappearing into parts of the foliage and then re-emerging in other parts like that. Again, we'll try that. Disappearing, reappearing just a little bit further up. It's quite an easy little trick, but it's quite effective. Maybe we should just thicken up the base of the tree, make it feel like it would support the rest of the tree. If it's too thin, it just won't look natural. Maybe a branch that just fizzles out, doesn't become anything. And then we just need to move across and deal with them all the same. Sometimes it's okay to start at the top of the tree and then have it join up, or you can start at the base and then work upwards. Entirely your choice. There's no right and wrong. You can zoom out, see how it's working. Now these are very much more distant trees still, but they are going to be very visible. So you just want to spend a little bit of time making sure that you're happy with the character of them. Again, if you press on more with the inking brush, then you get stronger, thicker lines. Move across here, maybe double that up, and then have more branches that just branch off and disappear into the foliage just the same way. Move across. Maybe we could have a couple of trees that are colliding together a little bit more. In fact, also with this one, I'm going to bring the tree trunk down a little bit further. It explains why it's bigger, because it's closer to us. You have to think about the distance, the perspective, to really help sell these illusions. So I'm going to bring this one a little bit closer down compared to the horizon line. It's encroaching further down. Again, use the Apple Pencil pressure to create these varying thicknesses with this brush. And like I say, another one thicker at the base, and then it splinters off, it branches off literally. A few gaps goes a long way to create that 3D effect. I think what I'd like to do is take that layer, layer 4, tap on it and merge down. And now we've got everything to do with those trees on one layer. We can slide and duplicate it. The bottom version, I'm going to go to the transform, flip horizontally, use the scale, pinch them down, trying to find the placements of them. Now obviously they are like a mirror, a reflection of what we've already got, so you just need to be careful not to place anything too obviously next to something so it looks like a mirror reflection. It might just be that one of the trees is what you use on this layer, like there for example. I'll go to the eraser, and if I set that at 100%, it's going to remove everything but that one I wanted to copy, and it seems like a lot of effort to go for one tree, but you can repeat the process. So tap on the top version, merge it down. Again, everything's on one layer, slide and duplicate it. Bottom version, transform, flip it horizontally, move it across, find an element of a tree that you think will benefit the scene. So I'm just going to take maybe those two. Maybe I'll take this layer and I'll actually go to the N and then turn it down and fade them back a little bit more. To push them further back, I'll put it to about 70%. And if you feel like there's any obvious duplication, well, you can easily go in with an eraser and just remove anything that's going to be obviously kind of like a reflection. We can build it up that way. So top layer, merge down, slide and duplicate the whole thing again. Bottom version, transform, flip it horizontally, shrink it down, play with that position, find whatever works, even if it's just one or two of those trees. Again, tap on that little N, turn it back, this time a little less far, so about 80%. And that's definitely helped. So again, I'm going to tap on them and merge them down together so they're on one layer. I'm going to create a new layer, layer 4. I'm going to put it underneath layer 3, and I'm going to go back in with the organic rainforest brush with the 5th color on the top row, 3% size, about 60% opacity. And I'm just going to blot in at this bottom area some darkness, take it up to the tree foliage. I don't want it to go any higher than that, so I'm releasing the pressure so it fades out about that point. Then I'm going to switch back to the 4th color. Same settings, but I'm just going to break up some of that darkness a little bit with a variety of these textures in there. Maybe I'll go back in with the 3rd color, in fact, and then just create a variety. Needs to be a little bit varied, not completely consistent. And stay on the same layer. I'll go back in with the inking studio pen, back to the 5th color, 10% size, 25% opacity, and well, we could just give the suggestion of a few more tree trunks in there as well. Don't need to go overboard, but just populate it a little bit more, like so. Okay, we're going to create a new layer, layer 5. I'm going to initially go in with a soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to go to the first colour on the middle row. I'm going to put it up to about 4% size and about 30% opacity. I'm just going to, where the horizon line is, just do a couple of stripes of that. Maybe a little bit more, scribble it in. We've got it on a relatively low opacity, so we can go over it a few times, and that's not an issue. And then I'm going to switch to the second colour. Turn it down to 2% size, still at 30% opacity. And then just in this section here, I'm just going to build in a few different areas of tone. So it's a bit more layered. In fact, I'll turn it down to 1%. Just zoom in a bit there. I don't really mind that it's going over the tree trunks. I can happily and easily reclaim those. That's not an issue. In fact, all we really need to do with that layer is just grab it and put it underneath layer 3. And it's given us a ground, a context for things to exist a little bit better already. Back to the first colour, back up to 4% size, and yeah, we'll just continue building in bands of this. It's not necessarily going to be completely straight in this sense. It might have more undulating surfaces, but just initially, I think it helps. And I really don't want to go in with like a full opacity because it's completely flat. I prefer to put it at lower percentages and just build in some texture and shape right from the outset. I'm going to go to the third colour, still with this soft brush, put it down to the lowest part of 2% size, still at 30% opacity. And I'm just going to go in there and at the base of the tree start to add some texture on the ground. Don't want to overdo this either. I'll just cut some bands across. So it could be partially things on the ground or shadows, just things around the base of the tree. Again, just to give them a sense of belonging in that particular space. A few suggestions can go a long way. So just a few taps across. And suddenly it becomes much more of a interesting terrain, and yeah, our imagination can just start to put so much more in there when you've just got a little bit more texture. And none of this is particularly detailed or thought about, it's just added. I'm going to switch to maybe the colour on the very end. Still with the same brush, which if you've forgotten already is the soft brush with an airbrushing at 2% size and 30% opacity. And just in this middle area, I'm going to have generally a sense of light coming through that centre area. And I really want this kind of focal area to be more illuminated. Maybe just skip between the trees a little bit. We have got a layer underneath the trees, but some of them are slightly translucent, so just skip in between them a little bit. Create more of a focus in this centre area. Bring some of this lighter hue and tone. Just have the eye wander more into these centre areas. A few dashes cutting across. A really nice glow is starting to build in. Now it feels about the right time to build in some more significant trees, so I'm going to go to the top layer and create a new layer on top of that. Layer 6, and I'm going to go in with the inking studio pen. It's going to have to be bigger, so about 25%, 60% opacity, and we're going to go back to our colours. I'm going to go for the 8th colour. And I'm obviously going to bring it further down away from the horizon line because it's going to be trees that are much closer to us. It's going to be painful to a certain extent because we're going to create tree trunks and foliage that just completely obscure some of the things we've already created. Sometimes you just have to be prepared to do that, and we are going to do that. So we'll create a tree trunk and we'll have it meandering up in our scene. Just zoom back out so you can really see the full extent, the context of what we're creating. I think I'd rather have it set back at a lower percentage. We could, again, just put it really strong, but I like to build things in more gradually. And we're not just putting the size of the brush up really big and doing it in, well, we can't anyway, there's a limit on this size of canvas. So because of the size of the trunk, we're going to have to do it more incrementally. So 25% size. And yeah, we're pushing the size of this tree upwards. and it's going off the edge of the top edge of the canvas, and we don't even get to see the whole of the tree. We are going to see significant chunks of it, so we need to make sure we do all of those. Having said that, just like with the trees over there, we have gaps appearing in the foliage where we see more things, and then other times we don't see as much. But I'm going to get some of the main features in, and then the finer branches we don't have to worry too much about. So I'm releasing the pressure there, and you can see it turns off to a smaller branch. I'm perhaps going to put it up to 80% for these details so they're not too translucent. And it just takes a little bit of time to really get to grips with releasing the pressure and getting the weight of those branches so it feels about right. You don't have to get all of them in initially, just get some of the important ones in perhaps. And then again, just like we did them showing through the gaps in the more distant ones, we'll do similar with these ones too. So maybe we can have a couple of tree trunks sat next to each other so that our trees aren't completely alone. Again, have it branching off. Don't worry too much about all these little details. We can go in there and we can add more. Okay, so we're going to do something similar on this side. So I'm going to have another one here. There's sort of a bit of a wave to it, why not? I'm going to thicken up this tree trunk a little bit more, in fact. Have it come down a little bit more, closer to us. Okay, I'm going to create a new layer and put it underneath those tree trunks initially. I'm going to go back to my brushes, the organic brush, rainforest brush. I'm going to go back to my colours, and I'm going to go for the 7th colour on the middle row. Put it at 2% size, 80% opacity, and I'm just going to start creating the foliage just like we did in the background and doing it in big clumps to begin with. So we blot in really big areas, and then other areas perhaps we just do it in smaller gatherings so we can let some of that light through. The gaps are important. Having said that, don't be afraid of just really blotting out large areas too. I'm just circling this in, and similarly, we'll go to the other side. And I do want to push them closer together. I might need to add another tree trunk in a moment. I'm going to go to that layer, tap on it and put on Alpha Lock. Back to my colours. I'm going to move a longer colour to the 8th colour. Move it up just a tad, so 3% size, and then especially around these edges and the top, I'm just going to lighten it up a little bit more. I don't mind some of the shadow areas belonging down here, deep into the tree and lower down. I think higher up and just on the very edge, it needs to be a little bit lighter. It needs to be a little bit of a contrast. I'm going to create a new layer and put it underneath layer 7, still with the rainforest brush, still well, about 2% size, maybe down to about 70% opacity. I'm going to move into the 9th colour, and yeah, I'm just going to extend some of this foliage further out. Same on this side. So some of the foliage that's really in the distance is going to, I don't know, have the light shining through it, create a translucency, and the light just shines through. I might just shut down some more of this light, in fact, that's through gaps. I don't want too many gaps. I think it works better if it's a little bit denser. So I want them to be coming closer together. We'll figure out the branches and the tree trunks as we go along, but let's just really narrow down the centre area. Create a little bit more drama. Back up to layer 7, back in with perhaps the 8th colour, and obviously we need to kind of respect those forms that we've already created. Again, fill in some more of these gaps. Let's get rid of some of those, that light that's coming through. Let's really shut it down. The alpha lock is off now, so we can go right up to the very edges of the layer that was underneath, really bolster it and reinforce it. Now these are all background layers, don't forget, so we're going to do more foliage over the top, and that's when it's going to become really that bit more dramatic too. But this certainly is an important stage. If it's getting pretty good at this stage, then it's definitely going to bode well for the rest of it. It's only going to get better from that point. Okay, so we'll go to the tree trunks and create a layer on top of that now. Back in with the 7th colour. And again, we can start to create some shapes, some foliage. This time it can cut in front. Some of this tree trunk and some of these branches, so it can start to obscure it in a really satisfying way. I don't want to go too over the top with this, but certainly I want to obscure big chunks of the tree trunk in areas, like so. Then we can go to the 8th colour again. We're on 2%, let's turn it down to the lowest part of 2%. We're keeping it quite high at the 70% opacity. And then I'm just starting to tap some of this highlight in now. In fact, I'm going to go to the alpha lock and put an alpha lock for that layer. So I can just quite freely add on top. And now, just like I did around the highlights for the background layer, we reserve some of the lighter tones for the top and the edges, and we're doing similarly here. So I'm also going to move to the 9th colour, and it should become much more apparent now where we can add the highlights. So I'm just circling in, shapes, taps, in and around some of these clumps to really bring the clumps out. In fact, I'm going to turn off alpha lock. We don't need it on. Change my mind on that. Let's just really circle in some of this lighter foliage to obscure some bits. I'm going to put the brush size up to 2%. That allows me to just even more quickly start to add some of this texture in here. Got a colour on the very end as well, which is a really bright colour by comparison, so we're going to have to use that a little bit more sparingly. So I'm just tapping it in slightly at some of those top edges. Again, perhaps just focus that near the very top. Would be a bit more sensible. And perhaps near the outer edges. And then, yeah, we can just extend some of this light tone on that very edge as well. Don't go and add too much of this though, but definitely some foliage will be kind of out on its own with this lighter tone. It can look quite nice. You have to keep judging it, so we're going to go back to the 9th colour, and we can just add more of that perhaps than the very yellow tone, or perhaps even one but more back, so maybe the 8th. We can certainly afford to be a bit more free with that tone. And this might be the point where we need to go back and we need to start thinking about some of those finer branches and tree trunk area and details. So, we've got the tree trunks that show through. I guess we can go back to that layer. We'll go back in with the inking studio pen, back in with the 9th colour on the top row, zoom in, and yeah, again, we can add some of these branches, and even without really a lot of effort, you can just twist some of those branches in. And because naturally we've created different layers on top, you almost don't need to do very much at all. You can just sort of sketch them in and they will appear and reappear in other places, not others. You really don't have to do a great deal. It's up to you to what detail you go in with these. I'm certainly going to add a few more. And obviously you can go with the eraser and you can decide to what extent some of these branches should be showing. If you've gone too far in some areas, then just dial it back. Easy to do, easy to fix. And then we can go back up to layer 9, and again we can go back in with the organic rainforest brush, back in with the 8th colour, and again we can decide how much of those branches we want to keep showing through. Maybe we're quite happy to obscure even more of them. Now that there's more to see, we can really judge how much the foliage wants to be cutting in front, sitting back. So you can sometimes need that foliage to really work with or work against to actually set the right balance. Let's just shut down some of the yellow a little bit. It's gone a bit far in places, so I can just quite easily go and scribble over, and you get a combination then of the orange and the yellow. A nice variation in tone. Just soften it back in some areas perhaps where it's needed. Back to the tree branch or tree trunks. Back in with the inking studio pen and back in with the, well, perhaps actually we'll go for the 8th colour. And maybe we could just add a couple of more tree trunks, perhaps just going off the frame there a little bit. But we can still have them creating an element, some details in the mix. Another one here perhaps. Okay, after a pause I've come back. I've slightly changed the camera. It doesn't always accurately represent the colours. It was looking a little oversaturated, so I've just subdued it slightly. And hopefully you can see a bit more of the variation as well. I'm going to go to layer 7, which had some of the kind of background foliage colours. I'm going to tap on it and put on Alpha Lock. I'm going to go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to go in with the 7th colour on the middle row. 6% size will do. 40% opacity with the soft brush with an airbrushing. And yeah, I'm just going to add it to the lower part of the foliage down here. The light is coming from higher up. It's going to definitely create highlights and stronger light in the upper areas and probably the edges. But anything that's lower down here, deeper within the tree, is going to have more shade, more shadow. So I can just use this to create a bit more variation. Perhaps we'll also go back to the 6th colour in that middle row. Same settings, and just now, probably just in the lower area, we'll add some of that real nice darkness, but not too much of that. Just a few more branches in on layer 6. So again, to the inking studio pen, dial it back to the 8th colour again. 20% size is fine, 80% opacity. How you use this depends on how confident you feel. Just a hint more tidying up along these edges of the tree as well. Just refine up some of the shapes before we move on to adding any texture. Make sure you're happy with the overall form. Any little anomalies, you can go in there with an eraser, just tidy it up. get the overall shapes how you want them. Then on this same layer, I'm going to go in with the organic rainforest brush. I'm going to set the color back a couple of notches. So I'm going to go for the 6th color on the top row. I'm going to have it at 1% size and about 50% opacity. And we're just going to go in and we're going to add some lines. You can see it already started to do it a little bit, but we're just going to drag some lines through to represent the tree bark and the lines that run through. There's texture there. It's not something that takes a great deal of time or thought about, just drag up some general direction. I'm allowing it to be a little bit broken. I don't want completely uniform lines going all the way to the very top. It's going to look a little artificial. So I'm just generally dragging up some texture. Now, if you've ended up with too much, then going with a smudge tool maybe. Doesn't matter what brush you set it on. I've happened to have it, but it's on something like the soft brush with an airbrushing. And just smudge some of that in if you feel like you've gone too far. Back to the brush. Yeah, and just define whatever you feel needs defining. I'm going to put the opacity up to, well, let's put it up to 100%, and then just every now and again we can just have some little bits of the tree bark, perhaps more centrally as well. Makes more sense. Just add a few extra things that stick out a little bit more along the way. Nothing too drastic though. And then same over here. Again, something we can go back to later on if we feel we need to refine it any further, but we're going to push forward. So we're going to go to our top layer and create a new layer, layer 10. We're going to go to the airbrushing soft brush, go to our colors, going to go to the 4th color on the middle row, 4% size, 40% opacity, and I'm just going to start building in some darker tones here on the ground level. We can work in some highlights too, but I just want to have a base note of a darker color first. And then we're going to bring it further down. I'll just pan up. And then I'll turn it up to 10%. Then I'm going to switch to the 5th color. Maybe start at the bottom. And a few passes of this, and then allow it to blend up, and then just stop a little bit short of where trees are. Go over it again. Oh, it's still at the 10% size, which is perhaps a little bit strong, so I'll put it down to 7% size. Then we're going to go in with the 6th color down here, shutting down a lot of the light. We're going to bring a lot of it back in, but I do think it's important we have a darker kind of note, a foundation to build upon. Back to our colors. Got a black on the very end of the top row, so we'll use that. I say it's black, it's not quite pure black, but it's as close as we have within this painting. Again, stop a bit short. We're going to have it more in the lower areas. Makes more sense, like so. Create a layer on top of that, layer 11. Now I'm going to change brush. I'm going to go to this brush with an organic swordgrass. I'm going to reset it, and then I'm going to show you how to amend it. So I'm going to tap on it again. We're going to change the spacing. I'm going to put mine at about 40%. I'm going to go to the color dynamics, and I want to turn the darkness down. I don't really want any of the shadow, and I'm going to turn the hue down to 2% as well, so it doesn't change color. The variations are less varied. And I'm going to change my color. Now I'm doing this for the very background, so maybe I'll start with the 4th color on the top row. Put it down to 1% size and about 60% opacity. And we're just going in there and we're starting to build in some of this texture. And I'm starting with a color that really isn't going to jar very much. In fact, that's too small. Let's put it up to the 2%. Isn't going to jar with what we've already got, which is great. I'm just wanting to start building in some more textures with this. We'll ramp up the colours as well shortly, but we're just doing this more gradually. So again, we're going to shift colours. We're going to go for more of the colours on the middle row, maybe the first colour on the middle row. Again, we're just going to build in. Now it's important to leave some of these gaps. So I'm going to put it up to the top end of 2% and just start to tap this in. And the texture of the brush is going to start coming into its own, and we definitely want some of the texture to be playing a part in this. So tapping it in, dragging it across, leaving gaps, and when you zoom in you can start to see that texture, which when you zoom out is a subtler effect, but it is definitely there. Turn it up, 3%. Again, leave some gaps, bits where it doesn't actually have that colour. Back to our colours. Probably need something stronger. I'm going to try the 7th colour on the middle row. And I'm going to build in some stronger variations. Nice warm colours over here. Some over here as well. Now, I'm going to go for something really more vibrant. In fact, we're going to go for maybe the 9th colour on the middle row. Yeah, and that's considerably brighter. And I think that the combined effect of all these different colours is really what's going to make this work. So we'll start to bring this colour across both sides and build up this texture. Now I'm leaving a little bit of a gap. I'm going to do a path, kind of track that runs through. Go back to my colours. I'm going to choose something. I'm going to go back to the 7th colour, and perhaps we'll turn this down a bit less saturated at 30%, and maybe even up to 4% size, and we'll just build in a foundation of this colour, and then we're just having it kind of undulating in and out. We want a windy path. I don't mind blocking in big sections with this warmer tone. Still want some of the black to show through, or the dark tone rather to show through. It's not really black. And maybe it's more at this side as well. I want to create it kind of winding as we cut through our scene. I'm going to come back to it, but I'll create a layer on top, layer 12. I'm going to go in with the airbrushing medium brush. I'm going to use the 8th colour on the top row. I'm going to put it at about 2% size, 30% opacity. And I'm just going to build it in a path. So I want it perhaps twisting this way, winding this way, and then winding back, and then winding up here, and then sort of disappearing where we don't quite see where it goes next. This is too dark a colour, and it's fine. I'm just using it to put it in place. But we can go and subdue it with lighter colours. That's not going to be a problem. Then stay on the same layer. So I'm probably going to go for the 2nd colour on the bottom row, still with the soft brush, with an airbrushing, and just start to subdue some of that darkness with this yellow. I'm just doing it as dashes that cut across kind of horizontally for the most part. But yeah, any kind of scribbling in just to make it lighten it up, get rid of some of that darkness where we need to. I'll go in with the 3rd colour as well. Perhaps just turn the brush down to 1% size, still the same opacity, and just go over this. Add some even stronger highlights in there perhaps. And then allow it to become more broken and gaps start to appear where we can see the darker tones coming through as we get down into this area. Then I'm going to go in maybe with the 7th colour on the top row, still with a soft brush. Rather, we're on the medium brush, aren't we, with an airbrushing. Slightly lower on the 1% size, still at 30% opacity. And we can just create some anomalies along the way, pressing lightly. I want it to be quite subdued. Just along the edges of that path there. And as it gets closer to us, press on more, have more of it gathering up into a darker tone. That's fine. Okay, so that will do for generally the path in the distance. We're going to focus on the foreground areas of it now. Go back a layer, back to layer 11. Perhaps we'll stay on the medium brush, but we'll try some of this colour, these colours with this brush. So we'll go for the colour at the very end of the middle row, 2% size, perhaps a little lower at 20% opacity. And bringing some of this yellow-orange in here. Just sideways texture. So we've got some of the texture from the swordgrass brush, but perhaps it's a little bit unnecessary in these sort of middle distance areas. We just want to get some of the tone in there probably. We can extend it a little bit further back as well, not too much. But certainly when it comes level with these foreground trees, we want to introduce more of this brightness in places. So it's a combination probably of the swordgrass and this medium brush with an airbrushing. So we get a nice interplay between those two different textures. I think the medium brush on its own just wouldn't really do the trick. The two together can work quite nicely. And we're going to go over the really more foreground areas with the swordgrass again, make them much bigger. Now along this edge, we just want to kind of have some bits that stick in and out. And we're going to introduce more of these sort of undulations as well. Gaps, breaks, where we see some of the dark tone just coming through. Do the same over here. Again, leave some of the breaks. Want it to look untidy. Patchy, with some dark bits showing through. And you can zoom out, you can see the overall effect starting to build up in relation to everything else. We'll change to the 9th colour. Top end of 2% now, still at 30% opacity. And yeah, we'll start to bring in some of this lighter tone here as well, still on layer 11. Bring some of this more orangey tone in. Well, some build up of clumps, gaps to remain obviously. Notice I'm keeping more of a horizontal movement with these gestures. It is quite sort of patchy, but it is consistent, at least in the way that I'm actually applying it. And that helps generally with the sense of a description of the land and the way it moves. Helps with the sense of perspective. I've started to do brushes that were going in every direction. It wouldn't necessarily help. Back to the 8th colour. Still with the same brush settings, but I'm just going to apply some more warmth in here, perhaps almost like a shadow effect. Have it dialing back a little bit past this point in the background there, in these areas. Have it creeping in a bit more. Let's turn it up, in fact, 4% size. Let's have a bit more of that warmth in there as it comes closer to us. Circling it in, just to fill in big areas. I'm going to go back up to layer 12. I think I would like to start tackling some of this path. So I'm going to stick with a medium brush. I'm going to go back to the colours. I'm going to start using some of these tones here and then work in some of the brightest ones afterwards. So I'm going to go for the 6th colour on the top row. Top end of 2% size, 20% opacity. And yeah, I'm just going to start sideways gestures that just start to create a surface here as well. Again, it's a very similar technique. I'm going to leave some gaps. Perhaps I'll even turn it up as it gets closer to us, 3%. Not massively different, but still a little bit. Perhaps even a little bit more. Let's put it up to 6%. Press on lightly. Have it softly start to build up here in the lower areas. You notice I'm leaving a dark bit, like a shadow, where it meets the grass. So I don't want to go any further than just creeping up to the edge there. And then same over at this side. Turn it back down again so that we can do that more effectively, 3%. And just creep it up to the edge, but not quite meeting the orange. Leave a dark area that's a gap. I think it looks nicer for it. And blend it on up there as well. Let's have a look at our tones. We'll go back a colour to the 5th on the top row. That's a lighter tone, so let's turn that down to 2% size, still at 20% opacity. We can just start to build in some of its impact. So less in, less at the edges, more in the middle this time. Turn it up again, maybe 4%. allow it to become more and more broken generally. I suppose if we're going to represent the vehicles or four-wheeled something has been up this path, then we need to create like a sense of two lines, don't we, like a real track. So to that end, I'm going to switch to the third colour on the bottom row, turn it down to 2% size and, well, really quite low at about 10% opacity. And 2% size, lowest part of 2%, I think. Bring some of these across, and then we can introduce some real gaps. Almost got an effect like it's puddles, water on the ground. Again, I'm doing all my gestures horizontally for the most part. Okay, I'm going to add a brush that I didn't mention at the beginning, but I'm going to need to add a different kind of texture here for the path, I feel. So we're going to go to the painting I'm going to try this oriental brush. So still on the top layer, we're going to go in with the third colour on the bottom row. I'm going to set the brush size at 4% and down to about 25% opacity. Yeah, I'm just bringing in fact, no, let's make it a bit. I'm going to put it at around 60% opacity. I'm just bringing in some gestures. Cut left to right a little bit. And again, we're representing this separation. Then I'm going to go in with the smudge tool. I'm going to set the smudge tool to the painting oriental brush as well. I can just smudge them together a little bit. And I'm also going to run some lines that cut through the path. So imagine you've had things that run along the path and just push those gestures along. And then I'm going to go back in and do the more horizontal, pushing around. Just scribbling it in a little bit, that's fine. Back in with the brush again. I'm going to turn it down, however, from 60 to about 30. And I'm just going to tap it in a little bit more now. More horizontal, but I'm going to build in the sense that there are two tracks. Obviously, if we have wheeled vehicles running through, you're going to increase the sense that there's dual lines cutting through here as well. Scribble it in a little bit if necessary. Turn it up, 5% size. Keep that sideways, horizontal-ish kind of gesture. Maybe just a few lines. Positive gestures with the brush. So this suggests the tracks as well. Nothing majorly, but then we can go back in with a smudge and further enhance that a little bit. Or just sort of tapping around and just, yeah, kind of randomly push and manipulate these gestures. Put it up from 3 to 5%. And yeah, just maybe push it forwards, push it up. Things that have come along the path would obviously push it in that direction. So perhaps we just need to further help. And then more gestures to the side again, just a little bit more, just to kind of blend that in, make it less obvious. We've got quite an impressionistic look for elements of this, and that's absolutely fine. Everything needs to be hugely photograph-like. I'm going to go back to the brush, lowest part 2% size, maybe about 40% opacity, and I am just going to build in some more of this, maybe even lower actually. Let's go for the 1%. And I'm going to build in some more of this texture along the path, in addition to all the things that we've got. So that's just given us a foundation, and then we can go in there and just add some highlights to it. Maybe turn it up again so we get closer to us, 2%. Have it start to fragment, maybe even up to 3%. Maybe we could have a change of tone, so we could go from that colour Water maybe, well, we'll try the second colour on the middle row. It's supposed to be reflecting rather the light and the colours. So we've got the light from there obviously, but now we're reflecting some more of the tree colours as well. Maybe turn it down, 20%, it's not too jarring. Actually no, 20% is too far down, 30%. Add some of this into the foreground areas. Bit of a tricky texture and an effect, but keep at it. Dial some of the orange back to the third colour on the bottom row, back down to 1% size. I'll put it up to 50%. I really want to build some of this strong light in there. Okay, and I'm also going to go back in with one of the dark colours, so maybe the 7th colour on the top row. And yeah, we need some of those darker colours having their effect in there as well. We don't want it to be totally lightened up. Maybe switch to the black on the very end. Get some stones, extra little things here on the road. Okay, we'll go back to the tree or the grass areas rather. So we'll go back to layer 11. This time I'm going to switch brush back to the organic swordgrass brush. I'm going to go for something more vibrant. So I'm going to try the second colour, or rather the 9th colour on the middle row. Let's try the 6% size, 60% opacity, and let's just start to tap in some of this texture here now. Certainly for the foreground, I think it goes a long way. Really adds to the effect. As it gets further away, it's going to start mushing together and you won't notice it as much, and that's absolutely fine. But for these really foreground areas, I think it's going to help quite a lot. Perhaps I'll turn it down to 4%. As we come back here, yeah, it's also going to start blending together. Be a little less distinct, and that's fine. Drag it along a little bit more. Then we're going to switch to the end colour again, last colour on the middle row, turn it down, 2% size, still at the 60% opacity, and just like we had before, we've got these areas back here, we add more of the yellow. Bring some streaks of this across. Just the edge of the path here, you can tap it in. And we're still on the swordgrass brush. Smaller versions of the texture, and that's absolutely fine. So all adding to the mix. Some more of the texture on here as well. Turn it up from 2 to 3%. As we get over here, we can just tap it in a little bit more. Break it up a little bit. Maybe even turn it up, back to the 6%, have some layering. I don't want to really go over that too much. I'm quite happy with that being mainly orange. I think what I need to do, however, is go in there and create some more of the gaps again. So stay on the same layer. I'm going to go in with the airbrushing soft brush, go back to my colours. I'm going to use the 8th colour on the top row, turn it down to 2% size and 30% opacity, and yeah, we're just going to go in there and we're going to add some gaps back in. If we've lost them a little bit along the way, then that's not a problem. We just reintroduce them wherever we feel is appropriate. So that's quite strong on the 2% or high on the 2%. We could put it low down, even in the 1% for some areas, especially back here. could have whole lines of it that join together. Doesn't all have to be just small little shapes, it could be larger collections. Turn it up again, higher on the 2%. Perhaps I even put it up to 70%, lower on the 2%, and just create a couple of stones in the mix or something. I'm going to go in with the first colour on the bottom row with, well, I'm going to use the soft brush for this. I could continue to use the swordgrass brush, but I think actually the soft brush sometimes is better. So lower on the 2%, 50% opacity. And I'm just going to use it now just to tease out some extra highlights in the centre area. I feel like it needs just a few more. Bring the light through this central region. Up higher on the 2%, bring it through here a little bit more. Back up to the path. I feel like some of the darkness there is encroaching too much, so I'll go back in. Well, with the soft brush will do. Back to my colours. Maybe the 6th colour along. 2% size, maybe 30% opacity. Just knock some of that darkness back. In fact, even that's too dark, so let's go for a lighter colour. Let's go for the 5th. If I lighten this area up a little bit more, it will emphasise the darkness here. Maybe we can even take it up closer to the edge of the grass. Sit it down lower, 20% or so. Just, yeah, have it encroach all the way up to the very edge of the grass. In many places. It's going to work a little bit better. And then perhaps a lighter tone even, so we don't want to completely destroy what we've got. Maybe the 3rd colour, turn it down to 15%. Yeah, just lighten up what we've got back here. Knock it back a little bit more. Push it further away. That works better. A few more anomalies around the base of the tree. In different areas. I'm going to switch to this 7th colour on the middle row with the soft brush with an airbrushing. Put it up to 5% size, 15% opacity, and I'm just going to use it to bring in some nice warmth at these edges here a little bit more. Bond it together. Really focuses the lighter colours in the centre. Back to the last tree texture we had, and I'm just going to add 1 or 2 more highlights in there, but pretty much we're fast approaching the end, so we'll go back to the rainforest brush, go to one of the lightest colours, so go for this first colour on the bottom row, 2% size, 40% opacity. Let's just add a couple more highlights in here. Nothing major at this point, just bring out a couple of highlights here and there. Okay, I'm going to leave this tutorial here at this point. I hope you've enjoyed following along and watching. If you do have a go, make sure to share your results with me. I've got all my social media links down in the description. Check out my other tutorials. If you have any ideas of kind of things you'd like to see from me, then please leave a suggestion in the comments, and I shall catch you back here soon. Bye for now.